Hello, my name's Peter Newman, the Chief Inspector of Coal Mines. Today it is a time for reflection, education, some correction, and the role of discipline and punitive action as a regulator. I will share with you today observations on our performance as an industry around high potential incidents and serious accidents, lessons learned and future investment and focus. If the events at Crinum, Curragh and the Board of Inquiry findings and recommendations do not drive reflection and change in your organisation, I'd ask the question, what will? As coal prices drive production, when prices are up, the industry looks for additional capacity. When prices are down, as this time last year, it drives capability to be more productive. Missing in this relationship sometimes is the impact of price, especially record prices of recent times, on the mindfulness of your leadership teams and the coal mine workers who they lead. I ask you to consider this presentation in that context. So to reflection. As we say, if the events at Crinum, the death of Graham Dawson, Curragh, the death of Clark Pearden, and the Board of Inquiry into the serious injuries sustained by 5 coal mine workers and the many others seriously impacted do not drive reflection and change in your organisation, I ask the question, what will? It is appropriate that we spend a moment of reflection, acknowledging the people impacted by these disasters, the individuals, families, workmates and communities they came from, and asking yourself, what have I as a leader in the industry done to learn from these events? Invest in this moment to reflect. Please ask yourself in the mirror, have I done enough? What else can be done? And maybe ask the question, with record coal prices, what impact is there on the mindfulness of your leadership teams and coal mine workers? Thank you. Engaging with industry, be it in forums, meetings, inspections, we continue to observe a behaviour of senior leaders seeing it as someone else's responsibility, be it corporate office, the regulator or the supervisor. Recent discussions with dragline crews and dragline supervisors in the field reflect a culture that had it drummed into them that the cost of draglines being down for a minute. So yes, they look to undertake activities under the housing and around the shoe without stopping the dragline. Those same people now understand that behaviour has to change, but that a culture of behaviour change is a long process. It is not about changing the procedure, uploading it into the safety and health management system, and job done. Some organisations have introduced proximity technology onto draglines, and the industry must learn from those leading the way. Our observations are that many continue to believe it is business as usual and it won't happen to us. What's really disappointing are those businesses not sharing the learnings from safety alerts, be them from the regulator or from their own organisations, with the affected workers. In the case of dragline operators, we've had evidence during spot start of shift meetings, one-on-one interfaces with these operators, OCE forums and ERZ forums, that this sharing isn't happening. Placing a safety alert in a supervisor's mailbox, as we have observed on many sites, is not good enough. You must validate in the field. Your obligations as industry leaders is to ensure learnings are learned, implemented and validated, not just to comply with the distribution of a message. I'll now move on to industry performance. To a certain extent, it's a good news story, but with some caution, with high potential injury frequency rates in coal trending up in both the open cut and the underground sector. The top line showing the underground and the bottom line, the surface operations. So we've seen overall a 13% increase in HPI reporting. We as a regulator continue to analyse mine incident reporting, to ascertain whether incidents are being reported correctly, and we're now working on the calendar year 2021 reports being sought from each of your mines. This is to ensure that SSEs and their teams are clear on the incidents that should be reported and encouraged, the over-reporting of HPIs so industry learns. There has been some discussion in industry as to lead indicators. When asked by a number of SSEs as to my expectation and the improvements we as a regulator want to see, I point to coal mines still having at the gates and shared with their workforce lost time injury frequency rate or total recordable frequency rate and how they are progressing. I'd much rather see the high potential injury frequency rate of that mine, the HPI categories to raise awareness in the workplace. Rather than the days since the last lost time injury, we should be reporting the days since the last HPI, with trends in reporting increasing being a green light and a reduction in reporting a red. Celebrating the reporting and learnings, because as they say, what interests my boss should fascinate me. So turn that to improving reporting on site. So where does that leave serious injuries? Trending up 28% this financial year, which is a concerning news story. What does it reflect? The lag of poor HPI reporting last year? This could be said to be normalising of near misses until they finally become hits. Our data analysts are data mining this data to look at the drivers. The hypothesis is that serious injury frequency rate lags high potential injury frequency rate, and hence the ongoing focus of encouraging reporting, as was quite clearly found in the Brady report. We espouse as an industry that there are no competitive advantages in health and safety. And again, we see some green shoots of sharing across the industry, be it through us as a regulator or directly between organisations. I'll now move on to high reliability organisations a year on. This is a slide that I shared with you in my address last year. Can I say corporate memory continues to fade? And it's up to you as leaders of this industry to cure this memory loss and ensure that corporate memory does not fade away. Too soon we forget the lessons of the past. I put it to you that organisations living by HRO principles have active corporate memory, an ongoing sense of chronic unease. They celebrate their failures and continually learn from them and others. I have three key observations on the industry performance in the area of HROs. The first is around the preoccupation with failure. So what does that mean? Process failures are addressed immediately and completely. What are we as a regulator seeing in the industry? An increasing need for my inspectors to suspend either part or whole of operations, either because those failures haven't been addressed or that they have been addressed, yet they haven't been sustained in the operation. I also see an increasing number of issuing of directives where obligations of office holders are not being met. Secondly, sensitivity to operations, listening to coal mine workers and walking the talk. We certainly see some, again, green shoots in this area, with pockets of improvements in site leadership teams engaging with coal mine workers. The last one I'd like to touch on is deference to expertise. What does that look like? Expertise rather than authority takes precedence. I spoke about this last year, and unfortunately in the industry, we see no area of improvement here in terms of risk assessments and risk management. We see the same failures that existed 12 months ago, and I'll cover this in one of my following slides. So what's our role as regulators and that of you of industry leaders? As regulators, we have a preoccupation with failure. When we come to site, to be asking the question, what if? It is in our DNA. Where we find failings, not to just talk about them with the senior site executive and their staff, but to hold them accountable through substandard conditions and practice notices and directives to make good. But compliance is just one of the tools in our bag, but it is one that we must use. Yes, we are there to educate through inspections, engagement, safety alerts, bulletins, forums, periodicals, guidelines, etc. We are there to correct behaviour through those SCPs, but ultimately, when required, we must be disciplinarians and ultimately punitive where behaviours are likely to cause or have caused serious harm through a lack of attention to detail and people not fulfilling their obligations. However, where should the balance be? My message to my coal inspectorate is we should be 80 to 90% of our time in the education and corrective space, with the balance in the discipline and punitive space. Obviously, the balance will vary depending on the regulatory performance of the operator. Observations this year, in terms of the issuing of directives on sites, says that 1 in 5 times an inspector comes to your site, a directive will be issued. So we're about 20% in that disciplinary punitive area. And I would suggest that we've nearly got the balance right. I used as an example RS20 and our observations through these audits. Cabin ventilation systems are generally not complying with that standard. Key issues being picked up on your mine sites. Yes, they may have dust management plans, but they're not in compliance with RS20. Intake filters are engine grade or lower. They're not the fine filters required of HEPA filters. Recirculation filters are coarse grade with no classification. And cabins are often not pressurised. So the dirt is left on your hands. The slide shows the dirt coming out, the dust coming out of one of those cabins on one of your sites. I ask the question, have you got chronic unease to ensure that isn't being sucked in by your operators? So the role of industry leaders, it is to ensure capacity, capability, and consistency. What does that mean? Capacity in terms of having the right number of people with the right capability and ensuring that there's consistency in how you're operating your mines from a health and safety perspective. Too often, even within an organisation, we see learnings on one site not being transferred to the other site within that organisation. It's incumbent on you as leaders to have that preoccupation with failure. I heard it said by a senior leader in industry, the regulator regulates, leave the operator to operate. I can't agree with that statement. In part I do, and that is we're not here to operate your mines. But the operator is there to self-regulate. You are self-regulated in many areas. Yes, there is some prescription in the areas of critical risk, principal hazards, but in general it is up to the SSE to have an effective safety and health management system through appropriate risk management, risk assessments and associated procedures. But it's by its very nature, the proposition that the regulator regulates and the operator operates is flawed. But I ask you, has the pendulum swung too far to self-regulation through a risk-based legislative framework? History would say that as leaders and as an industry, you're looking to swing back along the arc to more prescription. Why do I say that? Recognised standards, guidelines and the like have been developed since MARA number 2, and we now have over 1,000 pages of prescriptive pseudo-legislation contained in those documents. Are these documents and the huge number of procedures that make up your safety and health management systems improving safety in our industry? It's no wonder you're left scratching your head at times, because I certainly do. And the review of these documents is certainly on my agenda into the future, to look to simplify them, reduce them, and get back to what the legislation is required, and that is to be a risk-based legislative framework. I touched on the importance of investment of time and money to ensure a disciplined approach to safety and health outcomes in our industry. I'd just like to give some context to those statements. Investment is investment in time to ensure you have the capability within your operations, from the truck driver to the senior site executive. That capability requires training. In an environment of high coal prices, the last thing we see is organisations pulling people off the job. The investment in time, and I talk about risk assessments. It's the time required to have the right people in the right place at the right time to do those risk assessments, not those that happen to be going past the room at the time. Discipline. Discipline associated with doing what you say you'll do. I'll now go into the 6 focus areas that we continue to have as a regulator and give some context of those. All of them are underpinned by effective supervision. First, risk management. I touched on this previously. The standard is poor. The cross-section of the workforce invariably is made up of administrative people and others available at times. Rarely are experts involved. We require those experts to have greater involvement of those undertaking the activities, planning and investment. It's not a process of tick and flick to get to the desired outcome. What we find is invariably controls are administrative. They're not engineering, isolation or elimination. The question is why? Because engineering, isolation and elimination requires investment, financial investment and time investment, and sometimes redesigning of the process, which results in loss of production. Secondly, gas management. The Board of Inquiry findings highlighted that gas exceedances cannot be accepted as part of underground coal mining. They present and expose coal mine workers to an unacceptable level of risk. Recent second working plan notifications have undergone a high level of scrutiny in recent times by my Inspectorate and will continue to do so. I put it to you that a minimum of 3 months' notice, with all third-party reviews provided and associated risk assessments, will be required to facilitate this process between the Inspectorate and the SSE. Tyre management. Again, I challenge the industry. How many serious incidents have got to occur before you accept that it is a 2-person qualified people with fit-for-purpose equipment task? It shouldn't be up to the regulator, to my inspectors, to shut an operation because they see a standard forklift, not with a tyre grab, being used to change OTR tyres. And the recognised standard is currently under review, and we'll pick many of these issues up. So next, geotechnical management, both high wall stability and roof support underground. Next, dust management, and I've touched on this in this presentation. And finally, to misfires. What I believe in the open cut is the normalisation of events in a similar manner to what we had underground in terms of gas exceedances. And not to steal his thunder, I'll leave Alex Mandel, the Chief Inspector of Explosives, to cover that off in his presentation. 2 final points. A personal view that a rethink of how you remunerate your people and react to their bad news will go a long way to changing the discipline in how we operate as an industry. So finally, as coal prices drive production, an industry looks for additional capacity, be that in additional equipment, people, accessing new reserves, or in fact going back into areas or old mines that were uneconomic to take advantage of these high prices. There is a push to get those additional tonnes in short time while those prices are still elevated. Missing in this relationship is the impact of price on the mindfulness of your leadership teams and the coal mine workers who they lead. I ask you to consider this presentation in that context. I have shared this presentation of recent days with your electrical engineering managers, both from the underground and the surface, at EEM forums. At those forums, I had over 12 questions and comments relating to the presentation. I would encourage you to be asking the questions and making the comments so that we can improve together. Thank you.